Good morning, everyone. Our topic for today is all about performance criteria, rating scales, and checklists. We all know that performance criteria are the standards or indicators we use to judge how well a student performs a specific task or skill. They make grading clear, fair, and consistent. We use tools like rating scales and checklists to make sure our judgments are based on observable evidence, not personal opinion. Because assessment is not just about giving grades, it's about understanding learning progress by using structured tools that guide both teacher and learner toward clear expectations. Our objectives are differentiate rating scales and checklists as performance assessment tools in terms of their definitions, types, uses, advantages, and limitations. Identify and describe common errors in reading including scoring instrument flows, procedural flows, and teachers' personal bias errors like generosity, severity, central tendency, and halo effect, and explain the impact of these errors on the reliability and validity of performance assessments. Now let's dig deeper about the differences among rating scale and checklist. In the definition, rating scale used to measure the degree or quality of performance, behavior, or skill. This means that rating scale used to measure not just about whether the student did something, but about how well they did it. And it allows the teacher to describe performance. It also answers the question, how well was it done? This means the focus is on quality or degree of excellence of the performance. It helps identify how competent or how developed a learner's skills are. A checklist, on the other hand, it simply tells whether a particular task, behavior, or requirement was done or not done. It answers the question, was it done? The focus is on completion or presence of required elements, not on the level of quality, because sometimes teachers only need to verify whether the students have completed all requirements or followed procedures by checking each part or step and marking if it was done. In the types, rating scale have three types. We have numerical rating scale, graphical rating scale, and descriptive rating scale. A numerical rating scale uses numbers to represent levels of performance. For example, rate the student's speech clarity on a scale of 1 to 5. And graphical rating scale uses a line or graphic continuum where raters place a mark that best describes performance. For example, aligned level from poor to excellent. This type is useful when you want a visual representation of performance levels. And in descriptive rating scale, uses descriptive words or phrases to explain what each level of performance looks like. This helps both teachers and students to understand why they got that rating. For example, in evaluating an oral speech, rate 5 if it speaks clearly with confidence and correct grammar. Rate 3 if it speaks clearly but lacks confidence. Rate 1 if unclear and hesitant. Kumbaga, bawat number na ginamit for rating is meron siyang description, where in checklist, unlike rating skills, the checklist has only one format, which is the yes or no format, also sometimes done or not done. It does not show how well the student performed, only if the behavior, skill, or task occurred or not. Next is uses of rating scale and checklist in process or procedure assessment and product assessment. In rating scale, in process or procedure assessment, it evaluates the level of performance in doing each step, where in product assessment, it evaluates the quality of the final outcome. On the other hand, in checklist, in a process or procedure assessment, it checks if each step was followed or done. In product assessment, it checks if all required parts of the final output are completed. The main difference is that the rating scale for evaluating deep mastery and the checklist for ensuring that all requirements or steps are met. Next is the example areas where rating scale and checklist are used in a kind of assessment. In rating scale, based use in a task that require judgment of quality, skill, or creativity. It is used when the teacher needs to measure how well the student performed, not just if the task was done. In areas, examples like speech delivery, rating voice clarity, confidence, pronunciation, and organization. In group participation, evaluating cooperation, contribution, and leadership. In art performance, measuring creativity, use of color, and neatness. And writing performance, rating grammar, coherence, and structure. Where in checklist, tasks that focus on steps, components, or correct procedures, where accuracy and completion are more important than style or quality. And areas, examples, mathematics skills, checking if each computation step was followed. In science experiment, verifying if the materials were prepared and steps completed. And vocational task, ensuring safety tools and equipment were used correctly. And behavior checklist, monitoring if students followed classroom rules or showed specific behaviors. Next, we have advantages of rating scale and checklist. Rating scale measures degree or quality of performance, showing how well a student met the learning target, and provides descriptive feedback or improvement because it shows which areas are strong or need development. Encourages reflective learning since students can understand their strengths and weaknesses. Teachers can give more accurate, fair, and detailed evaluation of performance tasks, and students receive meaningful feedback, wherein checklist, it is quick and simple to use, especially when assessing many students or multiple tasks. And it ensures consistency and objectivity because the teacher only marks whether the item is done or not, reducing personal bias. It saves time, keeps scoring consistent, and ensures that all students are assessed using the same standard. Next, we have the limitations. And rating scale can be subjective if criteria are unclear, requires clear performance standards, meaning it depends too much on the teacher's personal judgment, especially if the criteria or performance descriptions are not clearly defined. That's why rating scales require clear and specific performance standards like rubrics or descriptions to guide the teacher in scoring fairly and consistently, where in checklist cannot show how well a task was done, may oversimplify performance. The checklist can only tell whether something was done or not done, but it cannot describe how well it was done. It simply checks presence or absence of behavior, not the quality of the performance. Because of this, checklist can oversimplify complex tasks. For example, a student may complete all steps of an experiment, so all boxes are checked yes, but the experiment might still be poorly executed or lacking in accuracy, something the checklist cannot show. While checklists are simply and quick, they do not measure the degree of mastery or excellence. Next topic, we have common errors and rating. Common errors in rating. These are the biases or flaws that make an assessment unfair or unreliable. We have three types of common errors and rating. First is scoring instrumental flaws. Second, procedural flaws. Third, teacher's personal bias error. Scoring instrument flows. These are vague or unclear evaluative criteria. Means that the criteria or standards written in the rating tool are too general or not well defined. And ambiguity means unclear meaning or maraming posibleng interpretasyon. When the criteria are ambiguous, teachers will rate differently because they do not share the same understanding of what the standards mean. Key idea dito are ambiguity in criteria equals inconsistent interpretation equals unreliable scores. Let's see the example. Imagine a writing performance task where teachers are told to rate students based on clarity of expression. Teacher A interprets clarity as good grammar and sentence structure. Teacher B interprets it as logical flow of ideas. Teacher C thinks it means simple, easy to understand vocabulary. Because the rubric didn't clearly define clarity of expression, each teacher gives different scores even for similar papers. This means all teachers will grade the same task using the same criterion, clarity of expression. However, the rubric or rating scale doesn't define what clarity really means. Because of that, each teacher interprets it differently. The result, inconsistent and unfair evaluation. This example shows how unclear rubrics can cause unfair scoring. Even if the teachers use the same term, like clarity of expression, they might grade differently because the meaning isn't defined. That's why, when we make rubrics, we must describe exactly what each criterion means to ensure fairness and consistency. Procedural flows. This happens when there is a problem in the way the rating or scoring is done, not necessarily in the rubric itself. In other words, the procedure or process of rating is the problem, not the tool. This is where using too many or poorly organized criteria means that sometimes teachers put too many indicators in one rubric, thinking it will make the assessment more complete, but instead, it becomes too long and confusing to use effectively. And where scorer becomes overwhelmed, results lose reliability. With too many details, their judgment becomes inconsistent. They might score differently for similar performances or forget to check some items. It makes the scores less reliable. They might give a different result. The key idea here is too many criteria equals scorer overload equals less accuracy and consistency. Let's see the example. Suppose students are asked to perform a science experiment and the teacher's rubric includes 10 criteria such as clarity of hypothesis, accuracy of measurements, data presentation, safety, teamwork, creativity, use of lab tools, oral explanation, time management, and reflection. Because there are so many aspects to rate, the teacher struggles to focus on all of them during the experiment. Some criteria get ignored and others are judged and consistently across students. This makes the assessment inefficient and unreliable. This example shows what happens when teachers use too many criteria in one rubric. The teacher becomes overwhelmed, cannot focus properly, and ends up grading inconsistently. That's why when we create rubrics, we should limit the number of criteria to the most important ones, about 3 to 5 clear and organized items to make the assessment reliable and fair. Teachers' personal bias errors. Personal bias errors occur when there is a general tendency to rate all individuals at approximately the same position on the scale. This means that the teachers sometimes allow their personal impressions, attitudes, or habits to affect how they rate students instead of rating each student objectively based on performance. The teacher's bias or emotional judgment influences the score. Generosity error. This happens when a teacher gives very high grades to all students even their performances are not equally good. It may come from kindness, wanting to encourage students, or avoiding conflict. However, this leads to inaccurate results because students who did not perform well still get high scores. For example, A teacher gives everyone 95 above in oral recitation, even if some students barely answer the questions. She says, I don't want them to feel bad. They all tried their best. Second is severity error. Uniformly low marks. This is the opposite of generosity error. The teacher gives consistently low grades to everyone, even though those who perform well. This often happens when the teacher is very strict or perfectionist, expecting flawless performance. Example, in a writing task, even if students wrote clear and creative essays, the teacher gives them all 70 to 80 saying nobody deserves a perfect score. So, hindi siya naging motivating kasi yung score na binigay is hindi nagre-reflect sa tunay na performance ng isang estudyante talaga. Central tendency error, giving everyone an average score. This occurs when a teacher avoids giving either very high or very low marks. Everyone receives average scores. The teacher fears being too generous or too harsh, so ends up rating everyone in the middle. This hides the real difference between excellent and poor performers. For example, during a group performance, the teacher rates all group as 3 on a 5-point scale. Even though some were standing and some were poor, she says it's safer to just give everyone a fair average. Like what I said, the teacher fears being too generous or too harsh, so ends up rating everyone in the middle. Last, we have halo effect, an error that occurs when a rater's general impression of a person influences the rating of individual characteristics. The halo effect happens when the teacher's overall impression of a student, good or bad, affects how they rate other unrelated qualities. For instance, if a student is well-behaved and polite, the teacher might automatically assume they also perform well academically, even if they don't. This makes the grading unfair and biased. Example, a teacher gives high marks in performance tasks to her favorite student who is always respectful and active in class, even though the project quality is average, or she gives lower marks to a noisy student, even if the student's work is excellent. In summary of personal bias errors, it happens when emotions or personal impressions affect grading decisions. When teachers are too kind, too strict, too safe, or too impression-based, the results become unfair and unreliable. That's why teachers must use clear rubrics, objective criteria, and blind scoring if possible to ensure fairness. In summary, common rating errors are mistakes teachers make when scoring student performance, making results unfair or unreliable. Scoring instrument flows, rubric or criteria are unclear or confusing. In procedural flows, this is where rating process is disorganized or has too many criteria. In teachers' personal bias errors, scores are affected by personal judgment or emotion, like generosity, severity, central tendency, halo effect. These errors reduce reliability and validity of assessment results.